know, it's interesting. We talk to a lot of people, a lot of hunters. Dylan and I communicate with hunters, and what's interesting when we're working with hunters for the day when we're designing their land, you talk to them for 8, 9 hours straight, 10 hours straight, 11 hours sometimes, even 12 hours. I've been with clients for 13 hours in one day. So it can be very extensive, and you talk about family, talk about work, but you can imagine 80, 90% is talking whitetail. And it's interesting, we talk about rut-only parcels. And this is a bad thing because people will recognize as they watch a channel, they watch videos, that they want to use their hunting land all year long. But unfortunately, most properties out there, they're relying on the rut to come around, go sit in your favorite rut cruising stand and hope a big buck comes by. Folks, I want you to have a lot more control in that, because when you have control in being able to hunt the entire season, then you have control more of a herd and actually creating not only a quality hunt, but a quality herd in the area. So to me, it's important that you focus on a parcel and you try to design a parcel that you can actually hunt year round, get the most use out of it. And as we were talking about this, we're going to talk about, what is a rut hunting parcel, why that's bad, why that's a really bad thing in several ways, but how you can maximize the investment of your land. And one of the things Dylan's question was, if you're spending all this money on the land, you're spending all this time in preparation for creating good habitat, getting your stands out there, and you're only hunting a week or 10 days, why not just go to a guide? And the reason we say that is you're not really managing anything, because if you're only watching deer for 7, 10 days, and you only expect deer to be around your parcel then those bucks are typically somewhere else. Typically people aren't hunting outside of the rut because they don't have those mature bucks on the land anyways at that time. They're waiting for rut cruisers to come through from someone else's property.
I would say that, I'm going to interject. I'm
Sure.
going to say this is if you do not have the means or time to go, or the
Certainly.
willpower to fix it.
Certainly. And that's too, like someone might not have the means or willpower, but they've spent a lot of money to do this. And then again, you're just getting that week-long hunt or 10 days out of the time. And when that happens, someone else is controlling the herd. Someone else is advancing bucks in the next age class. Someone else is actually managing the deer. And if someone else is doing all that, why not just pay someone else a lot less money? I made that decision when I was in the UP in Michigan. I remember I had 260 acres at one time. It was a lot of money. It was a lot of food plots, a lot of equipment to work on that property, especially in a northern parcel where I had to carve out food plots. It was just a lot of work. I loved doing it. But at the same time, I remember thinking, boy, a lease costs about 1/20th of this to actually lease better land somewhere else. And I eventually did that. But I started to balance that and just think, boy, there's a lot else I could do with this money, investment-wise or even hunting-wise, and get a better return. So that is a good question when you think about it. If you're only looking at that 1 week window, and I have a lot of clients that have talked about that. We've just considered we're just not getting the return on our land. We've just been thinking about going to a guided hunt every year. And I think that's why people do that, and they don't have any time. Now, I know people love working on the land all year, but I don't want it to come down to that. And that's what we see a lot of times is, well, we don't have a great hunt, but we love taking care of the herd. And folks, if you don't have a great hunt, it's because the animals aren't there. If the animals aren't there, you're not taking care of the herd. Number one here, the more does, the better, right? So people say that all the time. I don't understand why a lot of does is a bad thing. Well, folks, does take up space. You can take a 40-acre parcel. Imagine if you put 50 does on it, there's literally no room left for bucks, let alone mature bucks. You might have a few young bucks running around, but those older bucks are going to stay well clear there. And when those bucks do come back for the rut, and I see parcels like that, they have just an enormous amount of does and fawns. They don't have those mature bucks on there until the rut, so they sit and hunt during the rut. But even then, because all those does or fawns are there, you're going to have a lot fewer bucks coming through during the rut because there's too many does and fawns. And that is the way it works. It's not like you have this big center of does, so every buck in the neighborhood is on your land. There's not enough space. They have to bed down during the day still. These bucks aren't running frantic all day long. They're still taking long periods of breaks, and during the day, except for the peak of the rut, they're staying in a very small window of movement during the daylight hours, and you're just not going to have that many bucks on the land. We always talk about as the number of does goes up, trends upward, so does the number of bucks to a balance point. Once those does continue in number higher, then at that point, those bucks start to continue in number lower. So there's a balancing point where you get an optimum number of does that doesn't take up too much space, doesn't take up too much resources of food, and that means you can have an optimum number of bucks. And what's interesting, I see a direct correlation with a number that I like to see of total bucks, not buck to doe ratio, but total does and fawns to total bucks. And total bucks meaning every buck that stops by your property you get a picture of or see during the hunting season. That's why game cameras and trail cameras are great to use, because they give you a snapshot of how many bucks are in the neighborhood, not necessarily what's on your land. Who cares what's just on your land? I want to see the number of bucks in the neighborhood. And on a good property, you're going to see about 95 to 100% of all bucks within a half mile to a mile of your property in all directions throughout the season. If you have a good parcel, if you're not exerting too much hunting pressure, if you're not hunting during the wrong times, if you have the right habitat, the right food, the right cover, then you're going to see your optimum number of bucks. And what I typically see is the number of does and fawns will be far less than the number of total bucks that you'll see throughout an entire season. Not those bucks that live on your property on a daily basis, but those that focus on your property during the daylight for the most part at some point during the season. We talk about our property in Coon Valley a lot that we like to hunt, and I've hunted that for 8 years now. It's about 30 some acres of cover that can actually hold deer. And then we have our food plots out in some open fields, some switchgrass, some screening lines. Got some good topography there so it hides deer. But we're routinely on one camera in a certain location in the middle of our food plots. We'll get pictures of 30 to 35 bucks, and about 95 to 98% of those are during daylight at some point during the season. But yet it's hard to imagine we have more than 15 does and fawns on that property at any one time, focusing on the food during the daylight hours. Now, even when you have those does and fawns are living on the property. Some are on the adjacent properties, but they'll all get to that bottom of the funnel of daylight movement on the food plots. And at any one time during October, November, that's about the maximum number of does and fawns we'll see. And then that maximum number of bucks we'll see, that total buck number will be in that 30-35 range. Now, obviously, if we had 200 acres, we can push those number of bucks up a little bit, but not much more, because we're still pulling from the same mile and a half in all directions. That 200 acres would give us a little bit more. We have 245 here in Minnesota, so it's not that untypical, especially this year. We made a big jump from last year. We probably had 40 to 45 different bucks at some point throughout the season. Some of those were just one or two times, some of those several times. Some were here often throughout the entire season, even after the season ended. But that's far more than the does that we see, more than double the amount of does and fawns total that we see, in half of those fawns are bucks. So if you think of those numbers and what you should be seeing in on-quality properties, and I've been on well over 1,100 parcels in 26 states since '05. I say that a lot, and it'll be close to 1,200 by the end of this year. But on quality properties, that's a number I see all the time, that your number of total bucks far exceeds the number of does and fawns you have on the property. And think about that. If I had, instead of 15 does and fawns on the property in Wisconsin that we hunt, if I had 30 or 40, then that total number of bucks of 30 to 35 is going to keep dropping. Again, that's a total number, that's reflective of a huge number of bucks in the entire neighborhood. There's no more bucks than that in the neighborhood. So I'm getting that maximum number of capturing their attention at some point during the hunting season by following the practices that we talk about here on this channel. And if I put too many does and fawns on that property, we are not going to see those does and fawns or those bucks on the property, that total number, because there's just not enough space during the daylight. There's too much competition. There's a lot of shy bucks that don't want to come on the property. And you think about it, we have a video coming out tomorrow as we're filming this today right now. It's the, Dylan, the 31st of January?
Yep.
Yeah, 31st January. So on the 1st February, we'll have a buck video coming out talking about bully bucks and how to keep from creating bully bucks. But you have to consider, to me, there's more of an effect of bully does. Does can be incredible bullies on the property. They're bigger bullies than the actual bucks. Does rule the roost for the entire season. During the rut, they get chased around a little bit, and they allow that to happen. Nature allows that to happen. But outside of that, does rule the roost. And don't ever forget that. They'll kick those bucks out every single time. Why do you think a mature or a young buck left its mother in the first place? The average year-and-a-half-old buck, a yearling buck, disperses about 1.5 miles from where he was born and from his mother's fawning grounds. They leave because of female social pressure. The last place they want to find is an area dominated by female social pressure. They were already kicked out from an area like that. So think about that correlation. A lot of people think I have all the does, it's going to be a great rut. In fact, it's just the opposite. In fact, you're hunting the rut because that's the only time you probably have mature bucks in the property consistently, and that's a bad thing. Number two, because of that, you're not a herd influencer. No matter how much money you spend on habitat, no matter how much time you put into it, you can't say I'm helping the herd, because if you only have those mature bucks on your land during the rut, you know, it's different, like Dylan brought up. If that's the time you choose to hunt because of time, that's all you can do during that time. But if you want to actually do something good for the herd and you only have those mature bucks or the oldest bucks in the neighborhood, again, we say mature bucks. I'm looking for 5-6-year-old bucks here in Minnesota. I'm looking for more like 4 or 5-year-old bucks in Wisconsin. If I hunted public land in Pennsylvania, I'm looking for a 3-year-old plus. UP in Michigan might be a 3-year-old plus. So it's all relative to the area you're hunting. But bottom line is, if you don't have those bucks, that oldest age structure, during the entire season, or at least focusing on your land in and around the entire season, then you can't be a herd influencer. And it doesn't matter how many resources you spent to get to that point. And I want everyone that's watching this to be a herd influencer. And even clients will say, well, what if my neighbor calls, you know, for you to come out? Well, the first call I make is to my client. You know, I want to make sure that, but if they understand, I've only had 2 people say that ever. I had one that was very adamant. He had some neighbors follow us around while we were out in the woods, and he's friends with them. They invited us in for drinks afterwards, but he was adamant, I do not want you to work for my neighbor. And unfortunately, they had all the ag land, they had to open the fields. If the neighbors would have had me come over, it would have flooded his cover in his thick woods and swampland that he had with deer if they would have done it right on his neighbor. So typically, if you put multiple herd influencers in the same section together, incredible things happen that you can't even imagine. It's almost like a selfish thing. It's hard to explain to people, but it's better when everyone's on the same page and trying to do a great job. It's fun to share that with neighbors. It's never a bad thing to be sharing that common goal and practice with the entire neighborhood. Bottom line is, I want you to be a herd influencer. I want all of you to be a herd influencer. For that, you have to have all season food and cover. It's very critical. So you have to have food starting to peak in late August, September to start to establish that pattern of use. And then if it runs out after the season, that's okay. It's not that you're just focusing on the hunt and only the hunt. Think about when deer need food the most. They need it pre-winter. Once they get into winter, a lot of times they're just in survival mode. They're trying to maintain energy levels. But that buildup before they go into the wintertime, the deer yards up in the UP in Michigan, when you gave them great food in October, November that they didn't otherwise have, those deer would go into the deer yards in January, February, the full tank of gas. That helped them withstand winter. And then if you have great food, great cover, as soon as they come out of the winter, then they have that plentiful food source. Like, for example, we use rye and wheat. It's the most often missed opportunity in the whitetail woods, is that time just before spring green up for 2 to 4 weeks where there's nothing on the ground, there's nothing available. And if you have good habitat, where you have good fall winter habitat, you have high stem count, you have diversity, you have hardwood regeneration, woody shrub tips, briars, lots of weeds, forages, then you actually have browse. You have daytime browse for deer, and that's what's the most important. Something that's always there, it's very prolific. So when you combine that with quality food sources that last throughout the entire hunting season, and then if you have a surplus, you make sure that you have food lasting into January, and then February, then March, as late as you can get it to last. Because then what happens during spring green up and throughout the summer months really doesn't help the deer herd. They have several times more than they need during spring and summertime and into the early fall, where you can make a huge differences during the hunting season, not only herd health, but how you can influence and shape a herd, and then certainly hunt it as well. Number 4, when you hunt the entire season, you're not focusing on hunting 9 days in a row. Here's my rutcation. I'm gonna hunt every day for 9 days. You burn out your stands in 3 or 4 days. You do that on a long weekend in the middle of October. It doesn't matter if it's then or during the rut. Now I know there's some great rut stands out there. Someone just sits in a stand, waits for the next big buck to come by. They're in Buffalo County, Wisconsin, they're in Pike County, Illinois. They're in these great traditional buck counties, and they just wait for the next big buck to walk by. Again, you're not managing anything, you're not herd influencing anything. You're just sitting in a great spot and waiting for a nice buck to come by. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I'm talking about the real world setup where you go into a land, you hunt it hard for 3 or 4 days, you burn it out, the rest of your rutcation stinks unless you get lucky. I want you to be able to look at that all year long. You know, typically I'm sitting in Wisconsin, Minnesota, 22 sits for maybe $3 on average combined with both states. I'm getting to hunt from day one to the end of the season. Usually I have a tag around between the 2 states now. So I can hunt all the way to the end of the season. You know, with burning out that, trying to get a 4th or 5th buck, I might sit an additional 15 days just with that one tag. But those first 3 tags might last me 18, 20 sits. I can spread out my impact on the property throughout the entire season. So it's limiting hunting pressure. I'm not sticking all that hunting pressure, let alone all you guys out there that have 2 or 3 friends that hunt with you or several people in camp. So you have your rutcation, you have 80 acres, you have 3 or 4 guys hunting off and on, 3 or 4 hunters, and you just burn out that land pretty darn quick. So when you can focus on it, when you have deer focusing on your land for the entire season because you're doing it right, because you're offering all season food and cover, because you're spreading out your impact, then you can actually maintain the focus of bucks and does on your land throughout the entire season and help you be a herd influencer, mold and shape the hunt. For that, like we talked about, you have a balanced herd. Again, if you have a doe-focused property, you'll see some bucks during the rut, but let's face it, that's the only time you can count on any bucks being around, and it's not going to be your optimum number of bucks on the land. It's just going to be a few bucks coming through. You're never going to be able to control anything. Instead, a balanced herd is that herd that has the optimum number of does, meaning not too many does. You can fit more bucks on your land throughout the entire season. Then you have whatever your age structure potential is in the area. Some areas might be 5, 6 years old in those fantasy land states, 6, 7 years old even. I know properties, they're literally waiting until a buck gets to 6, 7 before they shoot it. They want to shoot it at its optimum antler potential. That's not here, certainly not in Wisconsin where we hunt, but there are fantasy land areas where that's taking place. But whatever your maximum age structure potential is, if you have that balanced herd, you get to see that. You get to experience better sex ratios. When that happens, you get to see more rutting, chasing, grunting, rubs, scrapes. Bucks become more competitive. You get to see more movement. You don't have those stale days, because when it's a cool weather day that we focus on HuntWise and HuntCast, then we see those bucks moving around. We see those great days because we have more of a balanced herd. There's not just an obscene number of does where a buck doesn't have to move more than 50 yards, he finds another doe or breed. And they're not really moving that much. Number 6, you get to see more bucks and older bucks. That's what I talk about. You see that maximum total number of bucks throughout the property. And what's cool about that, as you see the number increase here on the bottom of the triangle, then you see that age increase. So once this gets wider, you start out with a triangle right here, and this might be an average of 2.5 years old for bucks right here. And you have X number of bucks. When you increase that by 50%, then you push that total potential age up. That's that buck triangle I like to talk about. And I want you to experience it. That's a lot of fun. Number 7, all season hunter. You get to, again, manage the hunt in your property for a 3-month season. It's a lot of fun. And what's cool about that is you can spread out your impact. Now, I know I have friends that start getting to bowling leagues in September, October. There's other things they like to do during the fall. Now you can mix that in. You don't have to be all in for 9, 10 days, wear everyone out, including your boss, your spouse, your kids, your friends. You can be smarter about your hunt. You can pick and choose your days. You can pick and choose when you see the sign popping up. You can be a more effective hunter that way. You're not just relying on a certain stand. Imagine how much someone learns when they only hunt a certain rut stand or 2 every single rut. They get ready, they go out, they hunt those stands. What are you learning? Instead, when you can hunt all season, you get to see the changes from where bucks choose to bed, choose to feed throughout the entire season. You understand the relationships between bucks and does, young bucks, old bucks, where they move as it gets cold, as it gets warm again, why they switch from one food source to the other. And guess what? All those concepts that you get to learn, you get to apply anywhere a whitetail roams. So when you get to spend more time in the woods, obviously for a greater length of time, even if it's the same amount of time, but you get to spend that same amount of time spread out over 3 months instead of 9 days. Not only are you a better hunter for it in the future, but it's reflective of not only a better herd, but a better parcel. So I'd rather see you be a 3-month parcel hunter, a 3-month parcel owner, than just a 9-day rut hunt hunter that is reflective of a just little window snapshot of a total herd. And for that, if you can hunt those 3 months, if you can enjoy your property for the 3 months, you get to enjoy your investment, you get to enjoy your land, and you and your herd will be a lot better off for that opportunity. Folks, I want to make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to 93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.